Hello everyone, my name is Robert Lanier and this is my research proposal at this stage. I'd first like to thank Dr. Taylor and everyone else in this course for helping me refine and direct my study at this stage. Your input and comments and discussions have really helped more direct my study where we are right now. My topic's based on a problem at my school and my school district, as well as other schools in our area, and that is special education teacher attrition. To try and gain some insights into the underlying causes of these high attrition rates, I decided to research and analyze aspects of both job satisfaction and job dissatisfaction among this group of teachers. So the broad purpose of my study is considering the problem that special education teacher turnover is negatively impacting rural school districts in South Georgia. According to our Georgia Professional Standards Commission, which is our state licensing agency, one half of the state's teachers leave the profession within the first 5 years, and this is inclusive of all subject areas. Ingersoll did a lot of work, has done a lot of work in turnover rates of teachers, and found that as many as a third leave within the first 3 years and almost half leave within the first 5 years. And also finding that special ed is one of the subject areas that has the highest teacher attrition rates. The turnover rates are 50% higher for teachers in Title I schools, and all of the schools which would be in my population sample are Title I schools. And then there's clear research that teacher inexperience and rates of turnover negatively impact student learning. And the teacher inexperience comes into play because if you have so many teachers leaving, you're constantly having new teachers come in. And as we all know, if you spend a lot of time in the classroom, it takes a few years to really kind of get in your groove and understand what it takes to be a teacher and an effective teacher. So there are these negative impacts on student learning, and this is also especially important when you're considering special education students. So given that kind of brief skeletal background of what the problem is and what some of the research says about it, I developed a research question: what aspects of job satisfaction or dissatisfaction affect rural special educators' decision to stay in or leave the field of special education? Then for the qualitative research type, I chose grounded theory, um, and I'm specifically kind of looking at extrinsic and intrinsic motivators for teachers to remain on the job. And grounded theory fits because it is to explain a process or action. And this, of course, would be job satisfaction and the impact on teacher retention or attrition for special educators. From a theoretical framework, using Hertzberg's two-factor theory of job satisfaction, and Hertzberg himself used Maslow's hierarchy of needs as sort of a jumping off point. But rather than just talk about human motivation, which Maslow did, Hertzberg focused more on job-related issues. And his initial study was conducted in a factory where he interviewed and studied accountants, line workers, management, uh, and from his studies, he developed a two-factor theory, and he found that there were maintenance factors, which were more extrinsic, and motivation factors, which were intrinsic. And his big idea basically was that maintenance factors can remove the dissatisfaction, and they have to be in place. And these would be things like salary, company policy, things like that. But they won't necessarily increase job motivation and job satisfaction. The motivation factors are what increase the satisfaction, and these are the more intrinsic things like recognition, pride of the job you're doing, those intrinsic factors. So that kind of led me to a conceptual framework where I really wanted to look at the intrinsic and extrinsic factors that make up special education teacher job satisfaction and dissatisfaction. And then hopefully the research will lead us to kind of find how that may impact teachers' decisions to remain in or leave the field of special education. So for my key terms for my study and a proposal at this time. The first is job satisfaction, and I just chose to kind of go off of Locke's definition, which is the pleasurable state resulting from the appraisal of one's job as achieving or facilitating one's job values. Then we have three terms come up next: rural special education teachers, rural school districts, and high-need school districts. And I'm using the Georgia Governor's Office of Student Achievement, their definitions for these. Rural special education teachers, of course, would just be SPED teachers who teach in rural districts, as defined by the Georgia Governor's Office of Student Achievement. And the rural school districts are defined as school districts who serve fewer than 25 students per square mile of the district. Then high-need school district, that's a term that the Georgia Governor's Office of Student Achievement uses. It kind of indicates basically a Title I school. And those are school districts with high unemployment, low per capita income, and high percentage of residents with incomes below the Georgia poverty line. Now, all of the schools from my sample population, which is our Okefenokee-Risa district, are all qualified or designated as being rural and high need, and they're all Title I. So the next two terms are stayers and leavers. And stayers would just be special educators who remain or intend to remain in the field of special education. And conversely, leavers would be special educators who do not remain or indicate that they will leave the field of special education. And then for the purposes of my study and my theoretical framework, using Hertzberg, I pulled extrinsic motivators. For our purposes would be policies and procedures, administration and supervision, personal relationships, work conditions, salary and benefits, and safety. Then those intrinsic motivators that we discuss that are actually the keys to high levels of job satisfaction and job motivation would be achievement, recognition, the work itself, responsibility, advancement opportunities, and professional growth. Okay, for the purposes of triangulation, I'll be using three forms of data: interviews, artifacts, and a focus group. The interviews, we're going to try to get up to 5 rural special educators who have remained in the field, and then also identify and locate 5 rural special educators who have left the field. We'll use convenient sampling from the school districts within our Okefenokee Regional Education Service Agency. The artifacts will be gleaned from the study, and we'll look at not just the transcripts of the interviews and things like that, but also any other documentation, professional development, things like that, mentoring programs, anything that could kind of inform the purpose of this study. And our focus group will consist of the participants of the interview, and we'll also use that as an opportunity for member checks, just to, hit that trustworthiness piece and make sure that what I am reporting is what actually has been said to me, and that there's a clarity in it, and that it's reliable information based on specifically what our participants related. The analysis methods will be fairly similar, fairly consistent with what qualitative studies require. About the only difference is for the interviews and focus groups, we use audio journal of first impressions, and then with the artifacts, we'll just do a general review. But then we'll go through the coding process, start with open coding, and just looking at some specific comments that are made and trying to draw some similarities there through the axial coding. And then finally, utilize selective coding to try to pull, the big concepts from the responses that we've gotten and from the open and axial coding process. So with trustworthiness techniques, we've already mentioned a few, the triangulation and member checks, but we'll just kind of go through what we're looking at for this study. For peer debriefing, I'm trying to work it out with my district special ed director, who has her doctorate degree and has been through this process before, to be my peer debriefer. And she is definitely someone who wouldn't sugarcoat things, which is what I'm sure I'll need through this process. Triangulation is the 3 sources of data. which would be the interviews, the artifacts, and the focus group. We'll do the member checks, kind of at various times through the process, and then very specifically during the focus group, and just thick descriptions of the context of the study, just so it's very clear to whoever may read it, that it's descriptive enough for them to understand the full context of what we were doing during the study. I've touched on this a little bit throughout the presentation and participant selection process. We use convenience sampling from the member districts of the Okefenokee-Risa. As I mentioned, all these school districts are categorized as high need and rural according to the Georgia Department of Education metrics. Size-wise, they're all fairly similar. There are a few districts, mine and one other, that are a little bit larger than some of the others, but it does present a good kind of population pool to pull a good pool of participants from. And of course, these will be direct sources of data regarding factors of job satisfaction. And it'll be interesting to me, I think, to kind of see what some of the other districts, I know that they're dealing with high rates of special education attrition, but some of the districts are, I would say, a lot more rural than mine, for instance. And so I'm really interested in kind of seeing and comparing, someone from my district versus someone from a much smaller district to see how those motivators and those factors compare. Our expected number, we're going to try to have 5 stayers and 5 leavers for the purpose of this study. I do have a connection through a special ed mentoring program that we run through the Risa district, and I'm going to utilize that to try to find and identify leavers, people who have left the field of special education in our area. So the primary delimitation for my study would be the sampling, and that sampling would kind of limit the generalization of my study to schools and districts with similar demographics. I think after just doing kind of a preliminary look into the background of my study, that one thing that this study will do is kind of fill a gap in some of the research that's already out there. There's research on teacher attrition and retention, and there's some different research about special education, but there's really nothing to kind of tie that specifically to special education teacher attrition and retention. And because most of my experience has been in rural school districts, it's of particular interest to me to kind of know what factors would be impacting job satisfaction, and what factors would be considered by a person who was considering to switch out of the field of special education. I had an interesting conversation with my principal the other day, and he was very fascinated about this because just at our school, we average about 6 to 8 teacher spots, teacher turnover per year. And most every year there are 2 or 3 of those that are special education. And just in conversations with my special education coordinator, a lot of times that creates a lot of issues because, generally speaking, the teachers that fill those spots have not had a lot of experience in special education, and a lot of them haven't had a lot of experience teaching, period. They're fairly new to the entire profession, and that creates a really unique challenge because not only are you expecting them to come into a middle school and deal with all those issues of the social issues that come with teaching middle school, but you're also expecting them to immediately jump in and understand and kind of gain an understanding of how to deliver instruction based on the standards. And then on top of that, there are the paperwork requirements that come with being a special educator. And it can be very overwhelming. And I've seen firsthand in my school and my district, how difficult it's been to kind of maintain a consistent special education staff year to year, which, as we said earlier, the research indicates, that that's a very important thing for continued student achievement and student success. So in closing, I've appreciated everything through this course process. I've learned a lot, and I've learned that I still have a lot to learn. And I appreciate all of you, the comments and the input, and especially Dr. Taylor, the conversations and the input that you've given me. And I look forward to working through this process. Thank you.